I think the game everybody's waiting for, the Rose Bowl. Here we go. January 1st, Ohio State, Oregon, in what I think most of us believe is the two best teams in college football, at their best, are the two best teams in college football, having to play in the quarterfinals. The structure of this playoff is not right. Hopefully it gets changed in the future, and hopefully we can get the seeding right, because I hate that we're seeing this game now versus later in the playoff. However, seeing it in this game and then this venue, there is no better venue than the Rose Bowl, period. In fact, our sport should do everything that we possibly can to end the season in the Rose Bowl every single year as the destination in college football. The Rose Bowl should be the national championship game on January 1st every single year. It would be as good of a tradition as any in our country from a sporting perspective. And then we could have a transfer portal after that, by the way. That's a bit of a tangent. I will move on because I could get going for a long time on that. Ohio State and Oregon. Okay, these two teams already played. It's a 2.5 point spread. Buckeyes are favored. Everybody leaning in on the Buckeyes, in particular, how well they looked, really throttling and overwhelmed and overmatched Tennessee team with all that fake toughness with their shirts off in the cold weather and the warm-ups. So here comes Ohio State. Now they're favored over Oregon after losing to Oregon in the regular season. What did we learn from that first game? Let's talk about that first. Okay. Ohio State is a much different defense structurally now than they were then. And the reason is that game. Let me take you kind of behind the curtain a little bit, because I get a chance to not only talk with the coaches, but watch all the film and cover these guys. And we did a bunch of Ohio State games after that Oregon loss. And let me just tell you what was going on. Okay. Going into the Oregon game, Ohio State was using a pretty basic defense. All right. And the premise being no big plays. And this goes back a couple of years. You remember a couple of years ago when they got beat by Michigan, big plays, and then they got beat by Georgia. Why? Big plays. And so they needed to eliminate explosives. So last year, that's what they did. Now they ended up getting beat by Michigan again and went 11-1 and didn't get into the playoff, but they did a great job. They were one of the best in the country limiting explosives. And they did that primarily by just kind of like keep everybody in front, rush 4 and kind of a straight ahead style rush, not a lot of blitzing, not a lot of cover zero, not a lot of unique coverages, just keep everybody in front. Okay. And so that's kind of what they did against Oregon. Now, it was a little bit different. They would mix in some exotic pressures, but generally speaking, those pressures were bluff pressures where they're showing blitzing 7 guys, 8 guys, and then blitzing 3, rushing 3 and dropping everybody else out. And then what they were doing is that they were single covering on the outside, in particular to the far side of the field, and got hammered, man. Evan Stewart over Denzel Burke, those big plays down the field. And because they weren't really rushing the quarterback with any type of dynamic pass rush, guess what happened? Gabriel was allowed to sit there and throw the ball down the field. And that became a theme in hindsight to a lot of those big game losses that we had seen under Ryan Day in Ohio State, is that they could not get to the quarterback with their pass rush, whether it was Michigan or Georgia or Oregon. They did not get any sacks. So Gabriel sat back there and picked apart that secondary, which they thought was going to be one of, if not the best in America. And the problem is that guys like Evan Stewart, Tez Johnson, they are fast. They are dynamic on the outside. So you give them time and you don't get to the quarterback. Okay, so what changed then, Joel? Well, here's what changed. They decided to have a lot of internal discussion about what do we need to do with our defense. And there's primarily 2 things, and not to get too technical with it all, primarily 2 things. They wanted to change how their front 4, their defensive line, rushed to the quarterback. And they wanted to make sure that Caleb Downs was much more involved in every single play versus just playing safe and back and everybody in front of him. So the defense started to morph a little bit. And here's what you got. You got a lot more stunts. What's a stunt, Joel? It's when the 4 defensive linemen don't rush just straight ahead on their own, but they twist. So the tackle goes outside and the end comes inside, and that's a twist. Or one end goes all the way to the far side, and there's all sorts of these twist structures that we've got with the defensive line. And when that happens, it's tough to block as an offensive line. And we've seen that pay dividends, more pressure on the quarterback. We saw it against Tennessee. We've seen it against a bunch of teams. We saw it against Indiana in that game. They got some pressure on Drew Aller in that win over Penn State, and they were blitzing some of their linebackers, and they were willing to play more exotic in coverage with these 3 quality safeties that they have. So they've got Ransom, and they've got Burke in the back end, and they've got Igbinosun, and they've got Jermaine Matthews, a spare corner, but mainly they've got Caleb Downs. And Caleb Downs became kind of the focal point of what they do defensively by putting him in the middle of the field more. And I'm not talking about deep middle. I'm talking about like middle of the field. So he can affect the run game. He can affect the passing game. He can blitz. He can be in pass coverage. So all of that was a change. And it was specifically for the idea that they were going to have to be different if they got to see Oregon again or any one of these quality teams in the top 5 in the country. Okay. So that's a long dissertation about like specifically why Ohio State is better suited to face Oregon now than they were then is this change in their defensive structure. Now, on the opposite side, here's what I love about Oregon. What I love about Oregon is that they've got this quarterback that candidly, even as a Heisman finalist, is underrated. Dillon Gabriel is the quarterback of the number 1 team in the country. They went undefeated. It's his first year with the Ducks, and this guy looks like he is in complete control of their offense. I love watching this guy play. And let's face it, his first month, it wasn't great. Their offensive line wasn't great. They had a couple of those like sneaky wins, and you're like, wait, hold on. Remember, we dropped them all the way down to like 8, 9, 10 in the rankings. And then all of a sudden, they got right against Oregon State, and they've been better ever since. This is a really good football team and a quarterback that really gets it. And I thought that his performance against Penn State was a case study in what a guy can do against an athletic and aggressive pass rush. He's going to be under duress. These pass rushers for Ohio State will get pressure on him. There's no doubt. Sawyer, Tuimoloau, all these guys, all these blitzes that they're going to bring. But if you watch the Penn State game in the Big Ten championship game, you see these subtle movements of how he can elude and create just a little bit of space, create a little bit of time in order to get the ball down the field. He did it so many times, 3rd downs, 4th downs. And you see these subtle movements, and it reminded me so much of the way that Michael Penix played against Texas in the semifinal last year. You remember for Washington, like Texas was getting all sorts of pressure on him, and then you look up at the end of the day, and it's like they didn't sack him. So did they affect him? Well, not really, because he was brilliant in the pocket. And Gabriel showed elements of that against Penn State in that Big Ten championship game. I think he's going to have to do more of that in this game because this Ohio State defense is really good. They are really good. I think they're the best defense in America. Their biggest weakness are the corners, the one-on-ones on the corners. I don't think Burke can hold up in a speed type of matchup against Stewart. And Igbinosun has had major penalty problems. In fact, when I was, leading into the Michigan game, he had more pass interference calls than anybody in the country over the last 2 years. That's a problem. So if I was Oregon, I would attack number 1, the corner for Ohio State. Attack, attack, attack. That's what Indiana should have done. That's what Tennessee should have done. That's what any offense really should do because the interior of that defense is very good. The defensive line is very good. The linebackers are good. The safeties are excellent. Downs is one of the best players in America. So you've got to attack the corners, and they've got the personnel to do it. So where do we think that this is all gonna end up? Well, the one thing that I haven't touched on is just like, how does Ohio State want to play offensively? How do they want to play offensively? Isn't that the biggest question of the night? I guess day in the beautiful Rose Bowl. It's got to be the biggest question. Because if this team plays or has a game plan like they took into the game against Nebraska or like they took into the game against Michigan, then Oregon's going to beat them. But if they have a game plan like they took into Oregon the first time, even in a loss, or Tennessee in the first round of the college football playoff, then Ohio State will win. See, so much of this, I think, is dependent on how aggressive is this offense for Ohio State. If they're aggressive, they will score points. There's no doubt. And that's not a knock against Oregon's D. It's just the fact that, like, the statistics bear out that Oregon's defense likely will give up some points. They've faced 3 playoff teams, beaten all 3 of them, by the way. Again, they had the best regular season of anybody in college football. They beat Boise, they beat Ohio State, and they beat Penn State. And yet, every one of those teams, all 3 playoff teams, scored 30 or more points. So I think we'd be foolish to sit here and think that all of a sudden Oregon's going to hold Ohio State under 30 points. I don't think that that's going to take place. Ohio State, if they want to, and trust me, man, they should have learned that lesson by now, whether it was the Nebraska close win or it was the devastating defeat to Michigan. You've got to learn that number 4 needs to touch the ball. Quick game to number 2, Emeka Abuka. You've got to get the ball to Carnell Tate. You've got to get the backs the ball in space. This is a team that should have learned that lesson. Seems like they did against Tennessee, which was a good defense coming into that game and really didn't stop Ohio State one time. I think they punted twice with their starters all night, maybe once with their starters all night. In fact, I think their second punt was with the second team. So the fact that Oregon gives up some points when they face quality teams, 30 in each of those games against playoff teams, and the lesson that Ohio State learned against Michigan, we have to assume that the Buckeyes are going to score some points. And now you just have to make a pick. And this is the toughest one. Ohio State's favored by 2.5. Who do I think is going to win and by how much? I have gone both ways on this ever. And now I just I have to make it. And I know I solidified a pick. And so I'm going to have to stay with it. You'll see by the score, I'm just hedging all around. Ohio State 42. Oregon 41. Oregon covers because they're getting 2.5, and Ohio State wins and moves on. This game should be incredible, and I can't wait for it. Thank you for watching the Joel Klatt Show YouTube channel. And if you liked this clip, make sure to like it and subscribe to the channel, and you can stay up to date on all of my college football coverage.